Hey everyone, welcome back to Reboot, GameSpot's opinion editorial show. I'm your host, Mike Mahardy.
And I'm Jake Dekker.
And as always, in our off week of this bi-weekly show, we do a Q&A based on the last episode and possibly talk a little bit about the next episode we want to do and throughout the coming season. Last week, we put up a video about Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice.
My favorite episode we've done so far.
Yeah, mine too, I think. It kind of got a little bit deeper than I thought we would with this game. If you want to go check it out, people over in our UK office, Tamor and Adam, did a really great video about why Hellblade is important from a business standpoint in terms of AA development, kind of these smaller indie companies that are making like AAA looking and AAA level games without the massive funding of bigger studios, and why it's important in that way. And that's a great video to watch. So we decided to tackle it more from a game design standpoint. And if you haven't watched the episode yet, last week of Reboot episode 12, go back and watch it. It was about how Hellblade tackles like mental illness, and other games have done it before, and we'll get into that with the questions, which we'll get into in like 20 seconds. But I think Hellblade put the mental illness, specifically psychosis, in the case of the protagonist Senua, at the center of the gameplay, which was pretty bold, and it was even more amazing to see how faithfully they did it. Mm-hmm. They brought on two psychologists from University of Cambridge in the UK.
Yeah, their names were right at the beginning of the credits, too.
Yeah, they brought them on to consult and make sure that they were doing the psychosis aspects service in terms of the audio, the binaural audio in the headphones, and the actual hallucinations and how the puzzles fit into Senua's delusions and how her detachment from the world actually, resonated with some of the patients that these psychiatrists had worked with, and they consulted with them as well. So it was a pretty effective game in that respect. We do, as always, have a few questions. I had a comment on the video asking other people what other games deal well with mental illness in a meaningful way. And Jake, if you want to read the first response, I believe this was an answer to that question.
Sure. It's by TN Law 2004. The Silent Hill games, especially Silent Hill 2, usually have characters facing serious issues, often in their own mind.
Yeah, I'm a big survival horror, kind of horror game fan. I used to do a podcast with Mary Kish when she was still here, and I cover our horror games somehow, like whenever they come out here at GameSpot. And the Silent Hill games were some games I grew up on, and I agree. They always had some sort of, hallucinations or psychological horror and psychological thriller aspects.
Yeah.
I don't think any of the games meaningfully put it at the center of the game, but I think they used it well to characterize some of the actual characters in it.
It was two, wasn't it? That basically everything you saw, or your character saw, was a manifestation of her past and like kind of a twisted take on it.
Yeah, she kind of had like some PTSD from trauma in the past and Lost, which is similar to Hellblade, but they used it to good effect, I think, there. So thank you, TN Law 2004. Moving on to another YouTube comment from Rex Soul. Whether you like Hellblade or not, this game is a permanent landmark in the history of video games. It proved that small studios can do better without millionaire financing of giant publishers that limit their creativity. It proved that games can deal with serious subjects. It proved that games can leave the pattern everyone else follows. Yeah, we touched on that, and like I said, our UK team here at GameSpot did a more kind of inside baseball, but still very interesting video on how AA games are making a reemergence this year, especially Hellblade being foremost among those. But yeah, this game on a few different levels is really important. We decided to talk again about the emotional aspects and how the gameplay, the design itself, can be fun, but in a way that shouldn't be fun, I would say. But it still makes use of the main character like a pretty serious issue, and but it's pretty interesting that they managed to structure a game around that. So when Hellblade finally came out, a bunch of us were kind of like slowly starting to say, this game is really great and you should try it out. Did you know much about Hellblade before it came out?
I knew almost nothing. I think I saw a couple trailers as they were ramping up towards their launch, and the trailers I thought were really interesting, but I had no idea that it was going to be that focused on mental illness. I figured it would just be another hack and slash game with probably a strong story, because DMC did have a pretty strong story, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I knew almost nothing going into this game. Very happy I played it though.
Yeah, the combat was one of the points that a lot of people say takes away from this game.
I love the combat. I can see why it's I can see why some people would say it doesn't necessarily fit, and I think maybe there's a little bit too much combat in it, but I thought the combat was a lot of fun, as bare bones as it is.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like over-the-shoulder melee, not just like third-person Devil May Cry God of War action. It actually looks like what they're going to do with the new God of War. Yeah. The over-the-shoulder Kratos
People
kind
are
of
saying
thing.
It's similar to like For Honor.
Sure, that makes sense too. Yeah, like the actual fixed camera over someone rather than a free-flowing character action game. I'm interested to see what God of War does, and God of War is also Norse mythology. So yeah, Rexel, thank you so much for writing in on YouTube. Jake, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, this one's from
I don't think that's what it says.
This one's from Surf and Bacon. From
Surf and Bacon.
I think it's Surf and Bacon.
Yeah. Okay.
I've heard a lot of people say that she isn't the first display of mental illness in a game, Batman, Max Payne, etc., but she's the first display of mental illness where that mental illness takes the forefront of the story. The setting, the plot, the game mechanics, all of it is made with the constant presence of her psychosis in mind, rather than just dreams or flashback sequences that is only a minor part of the game.
Yeah, it was in Max Payne 3 when he was just essentially an alcoholic, and to regain health, you were just popping painkillers. And then he was dealing with PTSD and stuff from
depression.
Depression. His family died, right? Got killed. I might be misremembering. I'm pretty sure his daughter and wife died. And yeah, Batman, you have like the Scarecrow sequences, and Batman. I think the most interesting Batman stories to me always play like kind of on his psyche. Different graphic novels or movies will play on a different aspect. I remember Batman Begins' central theme is fear, and I really like that. And Arkham Asylum, which I think is still the best of that trilogy, and if you disagree with me, we can hash that out at a later date. But in Arkham Asylum, yeah, when you're fighting Scarecrow, you're kind of he's just massive in the background. And I really like that, but I do agree with Surf and Bacon that it kind of is the focal point here, and it drives the entire game in a very sad, but in a way that I don't think another medium could do. Can you think of any other games that deal with kind of like trauma, loss, or anything? Like, people had mentioned Spec Ops: The Line a lot in the comments.
Spec Ops: The Line is a good one. I mean, this is kind of different. Depression Quest, though.
Yeah, Depression Quest very much. That's very much more on the nose about it.
Yeah, it's a little bit more on the nose.
Yeah, Zoe Quinn made that about just like depression in the modern age, I'd say.
Which I actually haven't played, but I've heard a lot about it.
I've seen a lot of it.
A game that we've actually talked about a couple times, which isn't necessarily like on mental illness, but Papers, Please is very hectic, I guess, very stressful, and like I don't know if that's a good example.
It's about empathy, though. You kind of
empathy, yeah.
There's nothing like how to win the game, but there are some characters that are just so like really trying to ask you for mercy that you feel bad. Like not letting them across the border, even though you know that your pay will get docked or you might lose your job. And it's pretty tough, and I think those games are important.
Beginner's Guide. I don't know if you played the Beginner's Guide, but that game deals... That game is all kind of a different case because it's more about getting in the headspace of a game developer, but this game developer in particular is afraid of sharing what he's made, and I think that plays into paranoia, stress, depression... a little bit, but that one's way more abstract, I'd say, than this.
Yeah,
than
for sure.
Hellblade.
So Surf and Bacon, thank you for your question. And last one that we picked out for this week, Carlos Rodriguez on YouTube as well said, one of the most thought-provoking games I've played was This War of Mine. I found the decisions and backdrop to be haunting, leading me to reflect on what was happening in the world and how some people may have to make real-world choices in the same light. Yeah, definitely. It's
another game we've talked about in Reboot before.
Some of the comments on YouTube and on our site were saying this episode reminded them of the war episode we did, where other games could portray war better. And This War of Mine was one of our examples of how they can. It uses the gameplay to kind of emphasize this deeper point. Just for clarification, some of my favorite games ever made are dumb, and they're very fun, and they don't try to tackle psychosis issues. They don't try to tackle broader aspects of war. They don't try to,
shoot aliens.
Yes, you're bringing up XCOM and you're going to derail me. Yeah, XCOM 2 is one of my favorite games ever made. Actually,
I was
just about to say Majora's Mask is my favorite game ever made. And if you want to really get into...
that game definitely deals with grief and...
depression, grief, loss. If you want to get into some really, really hardcore fan theories, of which I have delved very deep into for Majora's Mask, a lot of people think Majora's Mask... If you know the game, there are 4 main areas, like kind of 4 dungeons and 4 areas structured around that in the land of Termina, outside of the overworld and inside the overworld and outside of Clocktown. And each people think that's one of the stages of grief. And then there's the, before and after. But each dungeon, like one is bargaining, one is depression, one is anger. I could go in more in depth, but I don't want to get derailed because Majora's Mask is my favorite game of all time. And maybe that has something to do with it. I really like that it's very dark and gloomy and oppressive. Rather than, time, I mentioned in Hellblade that time gets distorted a lot in it, and that's kind of a constant thing. I mentioned in the video that in one way or another, through myself or like people I'm close to, have seen a lot of these kind of problems up close, and Majora's Mask was one of those things where that was really impressive as well. That didn't put it at the forefront as much as Hellblade did, but if you go back and play Majora's Mask now, that game is dark, and it's Nintendo. It was a Nintendo game,
Yeah.
and they were following up on one of the most successful games ever made, and not to mention, like, they had to close out the N64 before they brought in the GameCube. I still can't believe that Majora's Mask exists as it does now, but if you want to, if you're watching this, go read up on Majora's Mask. But yes, Carlos Rodriguez, this war of mine does make you make some tough decisions. Not in the same way, not in as a serious of a way, but XCOM does as well. And the new expansion for XCOM actually also deals much more with the stress aspect. Some of your characters will have negative traits, like if one of their bond mates, like their favorite friend in XCOM, dies or gets hurt, they will have a fear of that kind of alien that killed them, and something will trigger in them. They'll panic or they'll get really angry. Some of them will become obsessive because they've survived by doing this one action so many times. They'll start doing that without you telling them to. It's really cool. And, you know, we mentioned the PTSD aspects in the war episode of shooter games, how that can sometimes help with PTSD or sometimes, you know, trigger it. But this war of mine is definitely a great example, and one of the ones that I'm glad we got to touch on in this episode again. That game's really special, and more people should play it when they get the chance. Jake, any last thoughts on Hellblade or like Ninja Theory in general?
I mean, if you haven't played Hellblade, it's definitely worth it. I think it's probably in my top 5 games so far this year. Obviously, there's still more to come out, but I absolutely love that. I don't know if I'll play it again ever.
I don't think so either.
Because it can be tough to get through, but it is really good.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't often say this, but it might not be your thing, but I would definitely tell everyone to try Hellblade. Do you want to kind of subtly tease the next episode? We said we won't do this all the time, but I think we're fairly certain. I'll be out of town for the next 2 weeks, so we're going to be working from across the country on the next episode. So hopefully we have decided on the episode. Do you want to subtly tease it?
Well, let's see. We typically talk about games that are recent, games that are timely.
Or very upcoming in this case.
Yeah, timely. Something coming up soon.
Yeah.
I don't know. What comes out at the beginning of September?
Yeah.
What comes out at the beginning of September?
Destiny. Yeah, and so obviously the old opinion editorial show for GameSpot was The Point, and Danny O'Dwyer was always really critical of Destiny in terms of its design. We're going to look at Destiny in a way most people don't always, and I won't say whether it's positive or negative. I don't know that it will be either positive or negative, but we're going to kind of look at Bungie and how important Bungie is to the modern design landscape, because a lot of people know that. A lot of people know how Halo kind of sparked the Xbox, and how Halo 2 sparked Xbox Live, etc. But we're going to look kind of throughout, like do a pretty brief history of Bungie and why games today exist like they do because of Bungie, and how fun they've made first-person shooters, etc. So that one should be fun, and we're going to bring Destiny into it, and I'll share some more thoughts on Destiny. This will be like a week before Destiny 2 reviews come up, so should get people primed and ready to go for a game that, from what I've played, seems better than the first game, but again, I don't know for sure. I haven't played it that much, but I'm looking forward to it. It'll kick off the fall season, and we'll have plenty of things to talk about on Reboot, so we're looking forward to it.
Destiny sucks. And that is episode 12.5 of Reboot. Thank you guys for tuning in, and make sure to leave your comments below. We'll definitely be checking those, and make sure to subscribe and come back next week so you can see what shenanigans we were up to.
See you then.
See ya.